The committee will please come to order. A quorum is present. Pursuant to Committee Rule 4 and House Rule 11, Clause 2, the chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning in the Veterans Affairs Committee. Today, the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee will be considering 12 pieces of legislation which cover the breadth of this subcommittee's jurisdiction. First, from Ms. Brownlee, we will consider two bills. H.R. 95, the Homeless Veteran Families Act, which will provide for reimbursements to housing agencies for the care of the children of homeless veterans, and H.R. 444, the Reduce Unemployment for Veterans of All Ages Act. This important bill will eliminate the expiration of vocational rehabilitation and employment program benefits. For the purposes of assisting veteran homeowners, we will take up H.R. 1988, the Protect Affordable Mortgages for Veterans Act. This bill will correct a statutory error in a 2017 law that protects veterans from predatory mortgage lenders. We're also considering H.R. 2109, the BRAVE Act, authored by our fellow subcommittee member, Ms. Rice. Good morning. The BRAVE Act will authorize the Secretary to give a preference to those contractors which employ veterans on a full-time basis. Also from the subcommittee, we'll take up Mr. Barr's improvements to the Edith Norris Rogers STEM Scholarship Program. I am a proud co-sponsor of H.R. 2196, and I thank Mr. Barr for taking the lead on this effort. Next, we'll consider my legislation, the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer William Bill Mulder Transition Improvement Act. I want to thank Ranking Member Bill Arrakis for joining me in offering this legislation. Both of us have heard quite a bit on this committee regarding improving transition assistance programs, and I look forward to seeing this bill pass today and on the House floor soon. We have two draft bills. The first to update home loan limits the VA can guarantee for veterans, often referred to as jumbo loans, and help veterans achieve home ownership in high-cost areas. The second bill deals with abuses in the flight training programs. Some unscrupulous flight schools have used vets to abuse VA benefits. Next up are two bills from one of this committee's former members and my colleague in the San Diego delegation and good friend, Mr. Peters, the Veteran House and Homes for Our Heroes Acts. These two bills make meaningful improvements to the HUD-VASH voucher program. This is an issue that is very important to me, as Southern California is ground zero for veterans' homelessness. There are around 40,000 homeless veterans in the United States, according to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and more than 11,000 of them live in my state of California. We must address this issue head-on, and I'm thankful for Mr. Peters' work. We're also considering Ranking Member Bill Arrakis' legislation, the Frye Scholarship Improvement Act. I'm thankful for your leadership, Mr. Ranking Member, in expanding the Frye Scholarship, and I'm proud to be your co-lead on this bill. Finally, we're considering H.R. 2045, the Vet Op Act. This legislation takes the important step to establish a fourth administration within the Department of Veterans Affairs. This change will make the agencies operate better, but it will also give Congress a better understanding of the needs of the programs. These 12 bills represent our first markup, but it will not be our last. When we gavelled this subcommittee in for the first time 1 month ago, I made a commitment that this committee would be a place where we would put partisanship aside, and I believe our work today upholds that promise, and I thank my members for that work. I look forward to seeing these 12 bills make their way to passage into law as quickly as possible. The chair now yields to the ranking member for whatever opening statement you may wish to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. And you kept your promise. This has been a bipartisan committee, and I appreciate that so very much. So I want to thank you for scheduling this markup on several of the bills, 12 bills we discussed at the subcommittee's legislative hearing earlier this month. I will be supporting each of the bills on today's agenda, as they are common sense measures that should garner bipartisan support. My continued support for these measures is contingent on corresponding, of course, offsets that must be identified to comply with the pay-go rules, and I look forward to working with the chairman and other members of the subcommittee to find any necessary offsets that have the least impact on our veterans. I would also like to review VA's views on several pieces of legislation that VA failed to provide testimony on at the legislative hearing. I want to personally thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including my bill, H.R. 2221, on today's agenda to expand the Fry Scholarship to survivors of certain deceased members of the National Guard and Reserve, and thanks for being the original co-sponsor as well. I'm proud to have introduced this bill with you, and I'm pleased that we are able to mark it up today, and hopefully we'll get it on the full committee markup and on the floor of the House as soon as possible. I want to also note that there are still multiple opportunities to improve and make necessary changes to any of these bills, and I will continue to work with the chairman and our colleagues on the committee and with any stakeholders that have feedback on these bills as we continue to work through the legislative process. And I thank you so much. I yield back. Thank you.
Without objection, the opening statements of any other members will be included in the record. Without objection, the following agenda items will be considered en bloc: H.R. 95, H.R. 444, H.R. 1988, H.R. 2109, H.R. 2196, and H.R. 2221. A discussion draft to amend Title 38 of the United States Code to reduce the credit hour requirement for the Edith Norris Rogers STEM Scholarship Program for the Department of Veterans. A discussion draft to adjust certain limits on guaranteed amount of a home loan under the Home Loan Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs. A discussion draft to make certain improvements to the educational assistance programs of the Department of Veterans Affairs with respect to flight training programs. A discussion draft to amend the United States Housing Act of 1937 and Title 38 of the United States Code to expand eligibility for the HUD-VASH program introduced yesterday as H.R. 2398, and a discussion draft of the Homes for Our Heroes Act of 2019 introduced yesterday as H.R. 2399. I call up the aforementioned bills. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 95
The
to amend.
text of the en bloc package was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bills will be considered as read. Does any member wish to be recognized to discuss the en bloc agenda items?
Yes,
Mr. Bilirakis is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for including my bill, H.R. 2221, Mr. Barr's bill, H.R. 2196, to improve the STEM scholarship program, and many other discussion drafts and bills that have wide bipartisan support in the en bloc package. It has my full support, and I'll yield back.
Hearing no further discussion, the question is on agreeing to H.R. 95, H.R. 444, H.R. 1988, H.R. 2109, H.R. 2196, H.R. 2221, a discussion draft to amend Title 38 of the United States Code to reduce the credit hour requirement for the Edith Norris Rogers STEM Scholarship Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, a discussion draft to adjust certain limits on a guaranteed amount of a home loan under the Home Loan Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, a discussion draft to make certain improvements to the educational assistance programs of the Department of Veterans Affairs with respect to flight training programs, a discussion draft to amend the United States Housing Act of 1937 and Title 38 of the United States Code to expand eligibility for the HUD-VASH program introduced yesterday as H.R. 2398, and a discussion draft of the Homes for Our Heroes Act of 2019 introduced yesterday as H.R. 2399. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the en bloc agenda items are agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we favorably forward H.R. 95, H.R. 444, H.R. 1988, H.R. 2109, H.R. 2196, a discussion draft to amend Title 38 of the United States Code to reduce the credit hour requirement for the Edith Norris Rogers STEM Scholarship Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, a discussion draft to amend the Title 38 United States Code to adjust certain limits on guaranteed amount of home loan under the Home Loan Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and for other purposes, a discussion draft to amend the Title 38 of the United States Code to make certain improvements to the education or assistant program of the Department of Veterans Affairs with respect to flight training programs and certain other programs of education, and for other purposes, a discussion draft to amend the United States Housing Act of 1937 and Title 38 of the United States Code to expand eligibility for the HUD-VASH program and to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to submit annual reports to the committees on Veterans Affairs of the Senate and the United States House of Representatives regarding the homeless veterans and for other purposes, and a discussion draft for the Homes for Our Heroes Act of 2019 to the full committee. And I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 2326. The clerk shall report.
H.R.
The text
2326.
was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of the bill, and I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2326.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered base text for amendment. And the substitute will be considered both as having been read and open to amendment at any point. Is there any discussion on the ANS?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Ranking Member.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for continuing the bipartisan work to improve the TAP and the transition to civilian life from the last Congress. As you know, it's a priority for me, for both of us, and for this committee. I was proud to support this package then, and I strongly support it now. I thank you, and I yield back.
Hearing no further amendments or discussion, the question is on agreeing to the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is agreed to as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably forward H.R. 2326 as amended to the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 2045. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 2045 to amend Title
The text
38.
was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of the bill, and I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2045.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered base text for amendment. And the substitute will be considered both as having been read and open to amendment at any point. Is there any discussion on the ANS? Mr. Ranking Member.
Yes, yes. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you again for putting this bill on the agenda today. And I know there were some concerns raised by a stakeholder at the legislative hearing on the bill regarding collective bargaining. I'm pleased that we were able to work this out together to find a compromise that I believe addresses these concerns. However, there was a last-minute change to the language regarding collective bargaining in the new fourth administration. While I have questions on the impact of the new language, in the interest of moving this important bill forward and giving the chairman's commitment to the work through issues in a bipartisan way, I appreciate that so much, I will support the amendment in the nature of a substitute. It is my understanding that the goal of this new language is to ensure that the status quo for bargaining unit employees would remain the same when the new fourth administration is created. Is that your read of the language, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Ranking Member, and I appreciate your comments.
All right, very good, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to working with you, as always, to address this issue if we later find that this language does not meet our understanding. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say that I was more supportive of the FTE cap for fiscal years 2019 and 2020 that was originally included in this bill. A similar FTE cap was included in legislation that created a new fourth administration that passed the House with bipartisan support in 113, so in other words, 113th Congress, 114th Congress, and 115th Congresses. However, in the spirit of bipartisanship and in the interest of moving this bill forward, I'm pleased, this is the way we govern, I'm pleased that we could reach a compromise which removes the FTE cap, but does limit the amount of funding authorized for general operating expenses from the VBA for fiscal year 2020. This authorization limit is linked to the recent released appropriated amount for this account in the text of the Milcom VA appropriations bill. If this funding level changes as this bill goes through the legislative process, I would expect that we would match that funding level in this legislation. My goal is, and will continue to be, to create this fourth administration in a fiscally responsible manner, and I believe that's your goal as well. I want to thank the chairman and his staff for working with me on this legislation, and of course, the amendment in the nature of a substitute has my full support. Mr. Chairman, I move that we favorably, again, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'll yield back.
I appreciate the kind remarks of the ranking member and grateful to work in a spirit of bipartisanship in service of our veterans. Hearing no further amendments or discussion, the question is on agreeing to the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we favorably forward H.R. 2045 as amended to the full committee.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. And with that, I appreciate the work of my friend, Mr. Bilirakis, and everyone on this committee. We actually can get things done in this town. And with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.